Lena's heart pounded the second she saw him. Ryan Brunner. Her ex Ryan stood at the far end of the street, laughing with friends like he owned the air everyone breathed. She froze mid-step, her tote bag slipping slightly off her shoulder. The last thing she wanted was for him to notice her, walk over, and start one of his smug, "You still miss me" conversations. Her eyes darted around for an escape, and then she saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, hands shoved casually into the pockets of a dark wool coat. He was standing near the corner, looking like he was waiting for someone. Without thinking, Lena walked straight toward him, and before she could second-guess herself, she slipped her arms around his waist. "Please," she whispered against his chest. "Just pretend you know me." For a beat, he didn't move. Then, surprisingly, his arms came around her, slow, warm, steady. He smelled faintly of cedar and something crisp, expensive yet comforting. "You okay?" His voice was low, gentle. She pulled back slightly, still keeping her face half hidden. "My ex. He's right there. I just needed someone to make it look like you've moved on," he finished, a small smile curving his lips. "Got it." They stood like that for a few seconds more, his body shielding hers completely. Ryan passed by without even glancing their way. When Lena finally stepped back, she looked up to properly see the stranger's face. And for some reason, her breath caught. Strong jaw, kind eyes. Not just handsome, safe. "Thank you," she murmured. He studied her for a moment before saying, "I'm Ethan." She almost laughed at how formal it sounded after what they'd just done. "Lena. Lena," he repeated, as though trying it on for size. "Well, I'm glad I was here at the right time." She nodded, offering a faint smile. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the way his voice lingered in her ears. Warm and certain, like he meant every word. What she didn't know was that Ethan would spend the rest of that day thinking about the stranger who had hugged him, and wondering why it had felt like he'd known her forever. 2 days later, Lena was sure she'd never see him again. Life had slipped back into its usual rhythm, or at least the messy version she called usual. She just finished her shift at the little flower shop where she worked, her hands smelling of lavender and roses. The early evening air was crisp as she stepped out, tugging her scarf tighter. She was halfway across the street when a black Audi A5, the latest model, slowed to a stop beside her. The tinted window rolled down. "Lena." Her head snapped toward the sound. Ethan. He wasn't in a coat this time. Instead, a navy sweater that somehow made him look even warmer. The kind of warm that had nothing to do with temperature. Her heart tripped over itself. "Ethan? What? How do you know where?" "I didn't." He smiled faintly. "I was just passing by and I saw you. Thought I'd say hi. Maybe offer you a ride home." She hesitated. It wasn't that she felt unsafe with him, quite the opposite. But she wasn't used to people showing up like this. "I walk," she said lightly, trying to deflect. "Then I'll walk with you," he replied, already stepping out of the Audi. It was ridiculous how quickly her pulse picked up. They fell into step together, his strides easy, matching hers without rushing. "I never got to ask," he said after a moment. "Do you often hug strangers on the street?" She winced, laughing softly. "That was desperate. I'm not proud." "I'm glad you did." His voice was quieter now. "It's been a while since someone held on to me like that." She glanced at him, caught off guard by the honesty in his tone. They walked the rest of the way mostly in silence, but not the awkward kind. When they reached her street, he paused. "Do you work tomorrow?" "Yes," she said before she could think of a way to keep it vague. "Then I'll see you," he said, as if it was already decided. And just like that, he was gone, leaving her with the strange, fluttery certainty that their story wasn't going to end as quickly as it began. The next morning, Lena arrived at the flower shop early, unlocking the glass door with the small brass key she always kept in her coat pocket. The scent of yesterday's roses still lingered faintly in the air. She went about her routine, watering, trimming, arranging bouquets, letting the rhythm calm her. The bell above the door chimed. She looked up, ready with her usual good morning, and nearly dropped the scissors in her hand. Ethan stood there, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "Hi," he said simply, his eyes crinkling a little. "You mentioned you worked today." She stared at him for a second too long, then quickly found her voice. "You remembered?" "I remember things that matter," he replied, setting 1 cup on the counter. "This one's caramel latte. If you don't like it, I'll drink both." She reached for it, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. Thank you. He glanced around the shop, his gaze lingering on a small display of potted succulents. Do you always work alone here? Mostly. It's peaceful, she said. Peaceful's good, he murmured, as if he understood that more deeply than she could guess. He stayed for a few minutes, leaning casually against the counter, asking small questions. Where she learned to arrange flowers, what her favorite bloom was, whether she preferred sunrises or sunsets. It wasn't like the typical conversations she'd had with men before. There was no rush, no need to impress. He seemed to just want to know her. When the first customer came in, he stepped back. I'll let you work, he said. But dinner sometime? No pretense. Just food and company. Lena hesitated, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup. She should have said no. She didn't even really know him. But instead, she heard herself say, maybe. Ethan's smile was slow, but genuine. I'll take maybe. And when he walked out, Lena realized the shop still smelled faintly of his cologne. Warm, subtle, and far too easy to remember. Took Lena 3 days to finally text him back. Dinner sounds fine. That was all she wrote. Ethan replied within a minute. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. I'll pick you up. The next evening, he arrived right on time. He wasn't in a flashy suit or with an entourage like she'd half expected. Just a simple navy sweater, dark jeans, and that quiet confidence that made him stand out without even trying. The restaurant he chose wasn't one of those glittering, crowded places. It was a small, softly lit bistro tucked away on a quiet street. There were only a handful of tables, each with a candle flickering in the center. This is my favorite place in the city, he told her as they sat down. The food's good, but it's the quiet that keeps me coming back. Lena could see what he meant. The low hum of soft jazz played in the background, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel on edge. They talked, not about work or weather, but about the small, odd details of life. The worst coffee they'd ever had, the books they never finished. Reading, the kind of music they listened to when it rained. She found herself laughing more than she expected. At one point, their conversation paused, and he looked at her with a softness that made her feel both safe and unsettled. You know, he said quietly, I'm glad you hugged me that day. I didn't realize how much I needed it until it happened. She didn't know how to respond. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her napkin, and all she managed was a faint, me too. When he drove her home later, he didn't push for anything more. No lingering touch, no attempt to come inside. Just a warm smile and, good night, Lena. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her heart beating faster than it should for a man she barely knew. Lena hadn't planned on seeing Ethan again so soon, but it started in little ways. A text in the morning, hope today treats you kindly. A photo in the evening. The skyline at dusk, sent without a caption, like he just wanted her to see what he was seeing. Once, she mentioned offhand that she was craving fresh pastries from a bakery across town. The next afternoon, there was a knock on her door. Ethan standing there with a small white box in his hands, the smell of warm croissants curling into her hallway. I was in the neighborhood, he said casually. She raised an eyebrow. You live on the other side of the city. He only smiled. Guess I needed a reason to drive. They started meeting for coffee on Sundays. Sometimes they sat for hours, sometimes just 15 minutes if she was busy. But he always showed up and he always listened. Really listened. Felt safe. One rainy afternoon, she slipped and almost fell outside the cafe. Ethan caught her before she could hit the ground, his hand warm around her wrist. For a second, they were close enough for her to see the raindrops clinging to his eyelashes. You okay? He asked, voice low. She nodded, though her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the fall. Later that night, she found herself staring at the ceiling, wondering why the thought of him lingered so much longer than it should. It was late when Lena finally asked the question. They'd just finished dinner at a quiet Italian place he'd insisted she try. The city hummed softly outside, but their corner table felt like its own little world. Ethan, she began, tracing the rim of her glass. Can I ask you something personal? He looked at her, calm but curious. You can ask me anything. You have everything people dream about. Money, freedom, this life. She hesitated. But sometimes I feel like you're lonely. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, gaze dropping to the table. I am, he admitted finally. It's not the kind of thing people notice when you walk into a room. They see the suit, the car, the title, but they don't see that I come home to silence every night. Lena's chest tightened. Don't you have friends? Family? A few friends. Business partners. But family? His voice softened. They're gone. My parents passed years ago. My brother moved abroad and we don't talk much. The rest of my time gets eaten by work. And somewhere along the way, I think I forgot how to let someone in. She studied him, the sincerity in his words sinking into her. You let me in, she said quietly. For the first time that night, his eyes met hers and stayed there. Maybe that's why I can't stop wanting to see you. Lena's heart gave a slow, steady ache. The kind that felt like both a warning and a promise. Lena didn't sleep much that night. She kept replaying his words in her mind. Maybe that's why I can't stop wanting to see you. It wasn't just the sentence itself, but the way he'd said it. Like he wasn't trying to impress her, like it simply was. The next afternoon, she found herself at the small bookstore cafe she sometimes worked from. She'd just settled with her laptop when her phone lit up. Are you busy tonight, Lena? She hesitated, fingers hovering. Her heart was already answering before her head caught up. Not really. Why? Then he texted back. I want to take you somewhere. No pressure. Just come with me. By 7, he was waiting outside in a charcoal coat, leaning against his car. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. Where are we going? She asked as she got in. You'll see. They drove quietly for a while, the city lights blurring past. When they stopped, she realized they were at a botanical garden, closed to the public at this hour. How? He smiled faintly. Perks of knowing the director. Inside, the glass house was softly lit, the air warm and fragrant with blooming orchids. The place felt like a secret world, untouched and waiting. I come here when I need to breathe, he said, walking beside her. Thought maybe you could use a place like that too. She turned to look at him, and for the first time the idea of him, not the billionaire, not the polished man in a suit, but him, felt dangerously close to her heart. The glass house was hushed, the faint trickle of a water feature filling the silence between them. Lena paused beside a cluster of white orchids, her fingers brushing one of the petals like she was afraid it might crumble. Ethan was standing just a step behind her, his voice low. I don't usually do this, he said. She turned. Do what? Let people close. His eyes stayed on hers, steady but softer than she'd ever seen them. But I, like you, Lena, more than I've wanted to admit. The words seemed to catch in the air, delicate and irrevocable. She felt her chest tighten, unsure whether to step back or closer. Before she could decide, he moved, slow enough that she could have stopped him, gentle enough that she didn't want to. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, then eased her closer until the space between them was gone. His scent, warm, clean, and faintly like cedar, wrapped around her. Ethan searched her face for a moment longer, as if memorizing it, then bent just slightly and pressed his lips to her forehead. It was a kiss without rush, without demand, just a quiet, steady promise. Her eyes closed on instinct, the heat from his touch lingering long after he pulled back, though his hand stayed curled around hers. Why do I feel like I've known you longer than I have? He murmured. She didn't have an answer. She only knew her heart had started keeping time with his. Lena couldn't stop thinking about the way his hand had felt around hers, and that kiss on her forehead. It was just a small touch, but it had left her restless all night. Across the city, in a mansion that was too big for one person, Ethan was lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. He'd been smiling without even realizing it, the memory of her laugh and the light in her eyes replaying like his favorite song. Finally, he rolled onto his side, clasping his hands together almost unconsciously. God, he said quietly, voice steady but filled with something new. I think I'm falling for her. Please, make it work. He stayed still for a moment, the prayer hanging in the soft darkness. Then, almost without thinking, he smiled into his pillow. Thank you, Jesus, he whispered again, his chest warming with a feeling he hadn't let himself have in years. He tugged the bedsheet up to his chin, feeling both shy and absurdly happy, and, like a boy with a secret, he let out a small, muffled giggle. Somehow, it felt like the first night in a long time where his heart was exactly where it was meant to be. The morning sun streamed into Ethan's kitchen, spilling light across the marble counters. He had been up earlier than usual, a quiet energy in him that made him want to do something, anything, That would make her smile. When Lena arrived, she expected their usual casual coffee, maybe some light conversation. But instead, she found him at the stove, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly messy, flipping pancakes with an earnest concentration that almost made her laugh. "You cook?" she asked, leaning against the doorway, trying not to sound too surprised. He glanced back at her, a sheepish grin tugging at his lips. "Trying to. You like pancakes, right? I figured I'd, make them for you." She stepped closer, the warm smell of vanilla and butter wrapping around her like a hug. "They smell amazing," she said softly, watching how carefully he placed each pancake onto a plate, as though it mattered to him more than it should. For a moment, neither spoke. He slid the plate toward her, and when she reached for it, his fingers brushed hers, just enough for her to feel that same quiet warmth from the night before. "Thank you, Ethan," she murmured, meeting his eyes. He looked at her for a heartbeat longer than necessary, something unspoken lingering there, before he smiled faintly and said, "Anything for you." They ate in quiet at first, the only sound being the soft clink of forks against plates. But Lena could feel there was something different about Ethan this morning, like he wasn't just making pancakes. He was trying to give her a piece of himself. Halfway through breakfast, he set his fork down and leaned back slightly, his gaze fixed on the sunlight spilling through the window. "Can I tell you something?" he asked quietly. Her chest tightened. "Of course. I don't really have anyone," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "People talk to me, work with me, they smile and shake my hand. But at the end of the day, when I go home, it's just me. No one to wait for me, no one to ask how my day went, no one to cook for, or to wake up beside." The confession hung in the air. Lena felt the weight of it like he had just peeled away a layer he didn't show the world. She didn't know what to say, so she reached across the table, resting her hand over his. His fingers stilled, then slowly curled around hers as if holding onto something fragile. "You have me now," she said softly. "At least, for as long as you want me around." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and the corners of his mouth lifted just a little. "Then I think I want you around for a very long time." The morning air was crisp as they stepped outside. The small garden behind Ethan's home was awash in the gentle glow of the sun, dew clinging to the leaves like tiny diamonds. They walked slowly along the stone path, the kind of walk where time didn't matter. Ethan kept his hands in his pockets, but every few steps his gaze would drift toward her. It wasn't the kind of look that demanded attention. It was the kind of look that quietly memorized details. The way the light caught her hair, the faint smile on her lips when a bird fluttered past, the way she tugged her sweater sleeves over her hands when a cool breeze brushed by. At one point, Lena turned her head and caught him staring. "What?" she asked, smiling a little. He shook his head, eyes soft. "Nothing. Just trying to figure out how someone can make a quiet morning feel this alive." She felt her cheeks warm, and for a moment, neither spoke. They just listened to the rustle of leaves, their footsteps in sync. Then, without meaning to, Ethan's hand brushed hers. He didn't pull away, and she didn't either. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was warm, a kind of quiet that felt safe, like it belonged only to them. Ethan's gaze was forward, but his thoughts were entirely on the woman walking beside him. He'd been in rooms filled with people his whole life, but none of them had ever made him feel seen. Not like this. Finally, he drew in a breath. "Lena." She turned to him. He hesitated, almost smiled at himself for how nervous he felt. "I don't think I've ever felt this at peace with someone before." Her steps slowed slightly. "That's a big thing to say." "It's true," he said quietly, his voice steady but soft. "You make me feel like I'm not alone." She didn't reply right away, but the look in her eyes was gentler than words. Ethan glanced at their hands, still brushing with every step, and before he could stop himself, he let his fingers slip between hers. Lena didn't pull away, and for Ethan that was an answer. The morning sun poured through the wide glass windows of the boutique as Ethan and Lena strolled between racks. He'd insisted on taking her shopping, not to impress her, but simply because he wanted to see her smile. She was holding up a simple, soft sweater when a voice cut through the air like a cold wind. "Well, look who's pretending she's moved up in the world." Lena froze. She didn't need to turn to know who it was, her ex. He stood there with that same smug smirk, eyes scanning Ethan in his tailored shirt before settling back on her. New man? Wonder if he knows what you're really like. Ethan's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. I know exactly what she's like, and it's beautiful. So unless you have something respectful to say, you can leave. The ex scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. Lena didn't say a word. Not as they paid. Not as they walked to the car. Not even when they began driving back. Ethan kept glancing at her, the silence gnawing at him. Halfway home, he pulled over. Lena, he said gently, reaching for her hand. She kept her gaze fixed on the dashboard. Look at me, he urged softly. She shook her head. Lena. He gently guided her chin toward him, but her eyes were glassy, her lips pressed tight. That's when he saw the tear slip down her cheek. Without another word, he pulled her into his arms. She was already crying silently. His voice was a whisper against her hair. What we have now, what we're building. It will cover up for your broken heart. And she just stayed there, still crying, but holding on to him as if she'd finally found the place her heart had been searching for. Lena didn't pull away from Ethan's embrace for a long time. She cried into his shirt until his shoulder was damp. His steady heartbeat the only sound she could hear besides her own muffled sobs. When her breathing finally slowed, he kept his arms around her, his voice low and tender. I'm sorry, Lena, if that moment hurt you, he said. His tone weighted with sincerity. I'm sorry I took you to that boutique. I wouldn't have, if I knew your ex would show up. She shook her head faintly, still against his chest. It's not your fault. I still hate that it happened, he murmured. They stayed like that until she was ready to let go, though he would have held her all night if it would ease the pain she carried. Later that evening, Ethan returned to his quiet, sprawling mansion. But instead of feeling the usual calm, there was a heaviness in his chest, a restless ache that wouldn't leave. He went straight to his bedroom, sat on the edge of his bed, and lowered his head. God! He began quietly, his voice almost breaking. Please, help me heal her completely. She's been hurt so deeply. I see it every time she smiles, every time she tries to be strong. He paused, swallowing hard. I don't just want her to like me. I want her whole again. I want to love her the way she deserves. The room was still. The only sound was his breathing, slow but heavy. Please, Lord, don't let me fail her, he whispered. When he finally lifted his head, his heart felt a little lighter, though the longing to see her happy still pressed on him. That night, he lay in bed, staring into the dark, silently praying again and again until sleep finally took him. Ethan woke before the sun, his thoughts already on Lena. The image of her crying in his arms yesterday lingered, making him want to do something, anything, to make her feel safe again. After his morning prayers, he sat on the edge of his bed, running a hand through his hair, then reached for his phone. Good morning, Lena. I hope you slept well. I prayed for you today. Just wanted you to know that. He hit send and lingered for a moment, staring at the screen, imagining her smile when she read it. Then, before leaving the bed, he whispered another prayer. Lord, please, wrap her in peace today. Let her know she's worthy, loved, and whole in you. Somewhere across the city, Lena's phone buzzed on her nightstand. She reached for it, eyes still puffy from yesterday. When she saw Ethan's name, her lips curled into a faint smile at first. But almost instantly, the sting of her ex's condemning words replayed in her mind. You'll never be enough for anyone. You're too broken. It was as if those cruel words wrapped themselves around her chest, squeezing the air out. She set the phone down without replying, staring blankly at the wall. The warmth from Ethan's hug last night felt far away now, buried under the sudden flood of self-doubt. Her throat tightened. She rolled back into bed, pulling the blanket over herself as silent tears began slipping down her cheeks. Her voice came out in barely a whisper, choked with emotion. Lord, I just want to heal. Please. The mornings stretched on. Minutes turned to an hour, and still, she hadn't replied to Ethan's message. By late morning, Ethan frowned at his phone. No reply. He checked if the message had been delivered. Yes. But Lena not responding wasn't like her. Not after the day they'd shared yesterday. A wave of worry surged through him. He grabbed his car keys, no second-guessing, and left his mansion. The drive to her apartment felt longer than usual, every red light testing his patience. When he finally reached her building, He went straight to her door and knocked gently at first. "Lena? It's me," he called softly. No answer. He knocked again, a little firmer. "Please, open up." After a pause, he heard faint footsteps. The door opened slowly, revealing Lena. Hair tousled, eyes red and puffy, her oversized sweater making her look smaller than usual. Ethan's chest ached instantly. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. "Hey, you didn't answer my text. I got worried." His voice was low, full of concern. I just didn't feel like talking," she murmured, eyes cast down. He studied her for a moment, then stepped inside, closing the door gently behind them. "Lena," he said, moving closer. "Look at me." She hesitated, but when she finally lifted her gaze, he saw the sadness swimming in her eyes. "Whatever your ex said to you yesterday," he began. Her lips trembled. "It's not the truth," he finished firmly. "You are worth everything, and I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes filled again, and before she could say a word, Ethan pulled her into his arms. She clung to him, her tears soaking into his shirt once more, and for the second time in 2 days, she let herself cry without holding back. He held her until her breathing steadied, his hand gently stroking her hair. Quietly, almost like a vow, he whispered against her ear, "We'll get through this together." Ethan had planned to leave after making sure Lena was okay, but when she pulled back from their hug, her eyes still carried that deep sadness. He couldn't bring himself to walk out. "Have you eaten?" he asked softly. She shook her head. That settled it. He rolled up his sleeves and made his way to her small kitchen, pulling open cabinets like he lived there. "Sit. I'll make something," he said, already heating a pan. An hour later, she found herself eating warm pasta with grilled vegetables while he sat opposite her, occasionally cracking a quiet joke just to see if he could get a smile. She managed a faint one, and it made him grin like he'd just won something priceless. Evening came and Ethan still hadn't left. When she protested that he had a mansion to go back to, he only replied, "Tonight I want to be here, with you." Later they ended up on her couch. She insisted she was fine now, but when she leaned away slightly, Ethan reached for her again. "No," he murmured, gently but firmly pulling her against his chest. "Not letting you go tonight." At first she resisted out of habit, but his steady warmth and quiet persistence made her relax into him. He picked up his phone and tapped a playlist. Soft, ambient hymns filled the room like a gentle blanket. They didn't talk much. The music floated between them, carrying verses about peace and God's love. Ethan's hand moved slowly up and down her shoulder, rhythmic and reassuring, while she lay there listening to the faint hum of his breathing. Her tears had dried, but she didn't need to speak. She could feel that he understood. And in the stillness of that night, Ethan wasn't thinking about the deals he could be closing or the endless space of his mansion. Only the fragile, precious heart in his arms and the silent prayer in his mind. "Lord, heal her. Let her know she's safe here. With me. With you. With us in Jesus' name." Morning light spilled softly through the curtains, painting warm patterns across the room. Lena stirred awake to the smell of fresh coffee and something sizzling from the kitchen. In the kitchen, Ethan was flipping pancakes, humming quietly to himself. His eyes lit up when he saw her watching. "Good morning, pretty," he said, setting a plate down. "I thought I'd try to repay you for all the times you've brightened my days." She smiled, a little unsure but warmed by the simple gesture. Sitting down, she took a bite, and the pancakes were deliciously fluffy, with just the right hint of vanilla. They ate in companionable silence, but Lena noticed the way Ethan's gaze kept drifting to her, like he was trying to read her thoughts without asking. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I have to admit, I'm surprised by how much I enjoy this. Being with you." Her cheeks flushed. "Me too." He ran a hand through his hair, looking vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "It scares me a little. I'm not used to feeling like this." "Neither am I," she admitted. "But maybe that's why it feels so real." Ethan smiled softly, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand gently. For the first time in a long while, both of them felt a flicker of hope. Fragile, yes, but undeniable. The days after breakfast felt different, softer somehow, like the edges of Lena's world were less sharp. She found herself laughing more easily, her smiles less guarded. Ethan was always there in the background, not with grand gestures, but with small things that mattered. A text to check in, a favorite book left on her doorstep, a a quick call just to hear her voice. One afternoon, they went to a quiet park nearby. They sat on a bench, sharing a blanket against the chill, watching children chase each other and couples stroll hand in hand. Ethan pulled his coat tighter around her and whispered, "You know, I never thought I'd be the kind of man who's happy just sitting still. But with you, I don't mind." Lena leaned her head on his shoulder, her heart quietly swelling. Later, when they walked back, she caught him watching her out of the corner of his eye. That look again, the one that said he was falling deeper than he wanted to admit. For a moment, their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. Maybe, just maybe, they were both ready to stop running from the past and start something new. They were sitting in the quiet of Ethan's study. A week later, the city lights twinkling through the large windows. Lena had just finished telling a funny story about a childhood mishap, and Ethan's laughter still echoed softly in the room. But beneath the warmth, something shifted. Ethan's smile faded, replaced by a seriousness that made Lena sit up a little straighter. "I can't keep this inside anymore," he said, voice steady but filled with emotion. "Lena, since the day you hugged me that afternoon, I've been falling for you. Not because of what you have or where you come from, but for you. Your kindness, your strength, your laughter." He reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "I want to be the one who stands by you, not just when it's easy, but through every fear, every doubt. I love you, Lena, completely." Lena's breath caught, her heart pounding louder than she could hide. For a moment, all the walls she'd built around herself trembled. Then, softly, she whispered, "I love you too, Ethan." Ethan's face lit up with a joy so pure it made the city lights pale in comparison. That night, in the quiet between them, two hearts began to heal. Not just from loneliness, but from the weight of the past. Ready to build something real and lasting together. Did you enjoy Ethan and Lena's love story and rooted for them like they were your friends? Go ahead and subscribe our channel. Let's keep writing amazing God-backed love stories. See you tomorrow.